concern for the well-being of those we love and care for. In addition, as the weather gets colder, the days shorter, we need to be aware, sensitive to our own feelings as well. And so we're pleased to welcome this morning as our guest speaker, W. Daniel Hale, PhD. Dan Hale is a special advisor to the president of Johns Hopkins Bayview Medical Center and the director of the Healthy Community Partnership. He's also an assistant professor at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Prior to assuming his position at Hopkins in 2011, Dr. Hale was a professor of clinical psychology at Stetson University. He's the author of several books, including Depression Out of the Darkness and Into the Light. And in 2016, he was named Mental Health Professional of the Year by NAMI Metropolitan Baltimore. This morning, he will address us on recognizing and responding to depression. And following services after a short break, we hope that many of you will be able to join us for Kiddush conversation with an opportunity for additional conversation and questions of Dr. Hale. So we've spotlighted Dr. Hale, so you all see him on your screen. Welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's quite an honor to be able to be a part of your worship service today. So thank you for the invitation. I want to come to you today not only as a psychologist, a mental health professional, but also as a person of faith. My faith and my faith community have been a central part of my life for as long as I can remember. One of the principal teachings of my faith, and one that I take very seriously, is our responsibility to care for the most vulnerable among us. Growing up, that often meant volunteering at a program for the hungry and homeless in our community, or visiting frail elderly in nursing homes, or working with severely disabled children at the state hospital. Later, there were opportunities to reach out to those in the community who were suffering from discrimination and poverty. For me, the focus on caring for the vulnerable and suffering always meant reaching beyond the walls of my church. It didn't occur to me to also look inside the church. It wasn't until I began working with the seriously depressed that I realized many of the individuals experiencing the greatest sense of vulnerability and despair may be sitting in our worship services, suffering in silence. Later, I would be one of those individuals, feeling more vulnerable and desperate than I had ever imagined. The need for faith communities to reach out and care for those suffering with depression has never been greater. Depression is now recognized as one of our most serious public health concerns. Each year, and these statistics come from prior to the pandemic, so each year more than 10% of American adults experience a major depressive episode, and more than 20% will experience at least one episode at some point in their life. Furthermore, we know that depression is the major risk factor for suicide, now the second leading cause of death in 10 to 34-year-olds, and the fourth leading cause of death among adults 35 to 54. And there's been an alarming increase in the suicide rate in recent years, rising more than 30% between 2001 and 2017. We also know that depression is a significant risk factor for substance abuse, another of our most serious public health concerns. While we might want to believe that our religious faith can protect us from depression and suicide, we know that's not true. We have heard too many stories of religious leaders and members of deeply religious families who have suffered from depression and taken their own lives. We need to recognize that depression does not discriminate. It's found among the young and old, the religious and non-religious, and all ethnic and racial groups. I believe that the challenge for us as people of faith is to create communities where individuals experiencing the crippling pain and despair of depression can feel safe turning to their clergy and fellow congregants, a place where they are confident they'll be understood and supported and not judged. This starts by bringing the topic of depression out of the darkness and into the light. We must begin talking about it more openly, just as we're doing here today. We must talk about it in our youth groups, our adult classes, our older adult gatherings. One of the key points we need to understand and emphasize is that the clinical depression we're talking about is not the same as the sadness or blues we all experience from time to time when we suffer a loss or disappointment. Rather, this is a serious illness that can be life-limiting and even life-threatening. But we also need to stress the good news about depression, that it is a treatable illness and that there is hope for those who suffer from it. These are the messages that we need to share throughout our congregations and beyond. We can begin by providing educational materials about depression at our services and other congregational gatherings. These can help people recognize what depression looks like and understand the tremendous impact it can have on individuals, how it can wreck relationships, destroy careers, and even kill. So what does depression look like? Let me take a few minutes to tell you what it was like for me. First, there was a profound, deep sense of sadness, far more intense than anything I had ever experienced, and it never went away. There was absolutely no relief. It was with me every minute of every day. Then there was the loss of the ability to enjoy activities I previously had found gratifying and meaningful, including worship services, which had always been an important part of my life. I mentioned earlier that during much of my depression, I was suffering silently in church many Sundays, but sometimes I couldn't even make it to church. I felt too uncomfortable and out of place sitting among people who were obviously enthusiastic about their faith, while I was mired in my dark, joyless depression. If you had seen me during this period, you might have noticed a physical change. I lost more than 10 pounds because I had completely lost my appetite. Nothing sounded appealing to me, and I didn't have the energy to prepare good meals or even go out to a restaurant. One of the worst symptoms I had was a severe sleep disturbance. I had difficulty falling asleep every night, but even worse, I was waking up at 4:30 every morning, still exhausted, but unable to go back to sleep. So I would lie in bed or sit in a chair, staring into the darkness, waiting for the first signs of light and life. It was during these early morning hours that I felt the most isolated and alone. I also had difficulty concentrating and staying focused, which led to serious problems with my memory, something I had never experienced before. It wasn't like me to be forgetful and confused. I felt physically weaker than I ever had. There were times I seriously doubted I would be able to walk the few steps from my bed to the bathroom or kitchen. And it wasn't just feeling physically weak. My emotional strength was also greatly diminished. I didn't have the emotional strength or resilience to listen to anyone's problems or concerns. I was too fragile emotionally. And I felt utterly worthless. I was convinced that I was a total failure as a psychologist, a professor, a husband, a father. I felt I didn't deserve anyone's love or respect. And then there were the recurrent thoughts of death. I wasn't suicidal, but I couldn't get the thoughts of death out of my head. I became convinced that I would not live much longer, that I would die an early death. Finally, I felt completely hopeless. I couldn't see how my life would ever improve. I was convinced that I was doomed to a life of anguish and despair. But there was hope for me. Fortunately, with my education training, I recognized the problem eventually. It took me a little while, and I knew where to turn for help. I knew how to get on the path to recovery. I understood that I needed to see my family physician to get medication that could provide relief for some of my symptoms, that would help me sleep at night and restore some of my energy. But I knew I also needed to work with a psychologist to address other symptoms and issues. Medication alone wouldn't be enough. But not everyone has this knowledge. That's why we need to share this information in our congregations. I believe we all need to have a basic understanding of what depression is like, how it can be treated, local resources, and when to consult with a doctor or mental health professional. In addition to the information we share at worship services, we can organize special programs on depression following our worship services or as part of another congregational gathering. These programs can include more extensive educational materials and speakers who can present valuable perspectives on depression. We can invite representatives from organizations that advocate on behalf of those with depression and other mental health conditions. An outstanding example is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or often referred to simply as NAMI. We can bring in mental health professionals who can speak about diagnosis and treatment, and individuals who have suffered with depression and are willing to share their personal experiences. We also can offer groups or connect people to groups in the community where those who are directly or indirectly impacted by depression can share their stories and talk with others who are facing similar challenges. I would like to see all faith communities offer these types of programs on depression at least twice each year, perhaps in May to coincide with its designation as National Mental Health Awareness Month, and again in October, which is designated as National Depression Awareness Month. As we plan congregational programs, we need to be aware that some people affected by depression may not feel comfortable attending a program that is focused exclusively on depression. They may want to keep their interest in the topic a private matter. I believe it's important to recognize and respect their wishes. However, they're often the ones with the greatest need for information. That's why it's helpful to have the program as part of a regularly scheduled group meeting or activity where people would be attending regardless of the topic. This brings us to the serious issue of stigma. Unfortunately, too many people still have a negative association when it comes to depression. They don't view it the same way as they view another common medical condition such as diabetes or heart disease. Instead, they believe depression is a reflection of personal weakness, a character defect, or a lack of faith. Such beliefs are dangerous because they can keep people from receiving the information, the care, and the support they need. I believe it's important for all of us, but especially our religious leaders, to directly and explicitly confront the issue of stigma. We need to let people of faith know that they should not be embarrassed or ashamed if they suffer from depression, and that they should not hesitate to seek professional care, just as they would if they had diabetes or heart disease. While educating our congregations about depression and battling stigma are certainly important endeavors, I believe we can do more. Each and every one of us can be prepared and empowered to act on what we have learned, especially when our words and actions have the potential to literally save lives. When we notice changes in a person's mood, attitude, or behavior that could be signs of depression, we can take the initiative to discreetly share with them what we have observed and express our concern. When we do, we may discover that the changes we have noticed, perhaps they haven't been in worship services or another congregational activity lately, are due to changes in family responsibilities, and that there's no reason to be concerned. But if it turns out that our concerns are justified, that they're depressed, we can play a critical role by offering the support and encouragement and the assistance that can help them start on the path to recovery. Meaningful support begins by listening attentively and patiently as they share what they're experiencing, being fully present as they speak. The words we offer in response need to not only reflect our love and compassion, but also our understanding that the pain and despair they are feeling are not signs of weakness or lack of faith, but of a serious illness. The encouragement we then offer can be especially impactful because it is informed by our knowledge that there are effective treatments for depression. We can help even more by providing them with or directing them to reliable resources in the sources of information or resources in the community. But it's important to understand that even with our words of support and the encouraging news about treatment, depressed individuals may find it challenging to obtain the care they need. Tasks that would not have seemed difficult before they became depressed, scheduling an appointment with a doctor, finding a mental health provider who accepts their insurance, arranging transportation to their appointment, or finding childcare while they're at their appointment. These tasks may seem overwhelming. These are the type of tasks we can assist with, and it may be only because of such assistance that they're able to receive the care they need. Finally, it's important to understand that the need for support and encouragement doesn't necessarily end when someone begins treatment. The benefits of both medication and psychotherapy aren't immediate. It can take several weeks to notice a difference. During this period, our continued expressions of love and support can help depressed individuals stay afloat emotionally and remain committed to their treatment. But they also can do much more. Our expressions of love and support become part of the healing process. I know they were for me. They were powerful reminders that I was not alone and that I was loved and valued, even during my darkest times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hale. We have an expression that if you looked in our chat box, you would see the different people that participated in our service. We use the words Yasha Koach, which means you did a wonderful job, but it really means may you have the strength. May you have the strength to do what you need to do, what you think is right to be able to do. So we wish you a Yasha Koach for having had the strength to have gone through, and maybe you'll share a little bit later on in Kiddush conversation what your personal journey was that's caused you to become so much of an advocate for us, each of us in our congregations and in our families, to find the Koach, the strength that's part of that Yasha Koach, to do what is often so difficult to do, to recognize in ourselves and in others. We have recorded this talk. We will make it available this week. So if you know somebody or someone else that you feel can benefit, then you can send that talk. And of course, as always, our Shlemut committee is here and ready to deal and help with Sarah Shapiro, who joined us this morning as our Shlemut nurse, and Sherry Stern, our Shlemut social worker, and Sherry Stern as our Shlemut nurse, to be able to help you and your families. So we hope that you will join us with a short, we'll have a 3-4 minute break at the end of services, and then Dr. Hale will be back on for questions and to share a bit more of his personal